She was just the secretary, quiet, steady, invisible in the glass towers of Manhattan, until the billionaire CEO said, "I'd give up everything for you." But was it love? Or a lie? For Hannah Whitaker, life shattered in a single night. A mysterious USB slipped into her bag, an empire's betrayal, and the silence of the man she trusted most. 10 years later, she has built a quiet life in a Vermont orchard, raising two children who know nothing of their father's name. And then an invitation arrives, a wedding in the Hamptons. His wedding? What happens when past and present collide under the same roof? When a child's innocent question dad brings an empire to its knees, can truth heal what betrayal destroyed? Can a man born to power learn to be simply a father? And can a woman who survived heartbreak risk her heart again? This is not just a love story. It is a story of dignity, redemption, and the kind of courage that asks what is a home and who is worth staying for. If this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. A sharp wind swept down the avenues of Manhattan that morning, rattling against the steel and glass of Carlyle Holdings headquarters. Hannah Whitaker pulled her coat tighter around her, her hands dry and cracked from the cold. She paused at the revolving doors, clutching her worn leather bag close. Inside it were receipts from her father's hospital stay back in Vermont, along with a stack of bills she tried not to think about. In the polished glass, she caught her reflection, 30-something, hair pinned back neatly, eyes tired but steady. To the world, she was just another secretary rushing into another high-rise. To her family, she was the only one keeping things together. The lobby buzzed with the rhythm of a Fortune 500 company. Men in dark suits clicked across marble floors. Women in sharp heels scrolled through glowing screens. Hannah slipped through quietly, badge pressed against the scanner. The green light blinked, and the glass gate opened. She moved with practiced calm, though inside she was already reciting the CEO's schedule, a breakfast briefing, 3 back-to-back strategy sessions, and a confidential call with London. On the top floor, the air felt thinner, quieter. The offices were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Andrew Carlyle's office dominated the corner. His name was stamped on every financial journal, whispered in boardrooms, and envied in the press. At 44, he had built an empire that stretched from New York to Singapore. Yet when Hannah stepped into his office that morning, she saw a man leaning over his desk, tie loosened, shoulders heavy. Success had carved lines into his face, and solitude had deepened them. "Coffee, black, no sugar," she said softly, setting the cup beside him. He nodded without looking up, eyes still fixed on the document glowing across his screen. She stood for a moment, waiting for instructions. But when none came, she retreated quietly. In the outer office, the phones rang non-stop. Analysts argued over numbers. Assistants rushed in and out. Hannah handled each interruption with the same steady patience, rescheduling meetings, calming frayed tempers, rearranging logistics when a visiting delegation's flight was delayed. By mid-morning, the chaos had grown louder, but her calm only seemed to deepen. It was this calm that Andrew noticed, somewhere between reviewing merger clauses and fielding calls from Tokyo. He looked up and watched her at her desk. She sat straight, her notes crisp, her tone gentle but firm as she negotiated a last-minute catering crisis. He watched the way she wrote, precise, almost graceful. For a moment, the noise faded, and he saw not just an employee but a woman carrying the weight of a private world with dignity. Down the hall, another pair of eyes watched too. Victoria Carlyle, Andrew's mother and the chairwoman of the board, had come in earlier than expected. At 70, she carried herself like royalty, every pearl on her necklace chosen with intent. She had built Carlyle Holdings into a dynasty, and she guarded it like a hawk. As she stood at the window of the executive lounge, she saw her son glance at his secretary with something softer than professional regard. Her jaw tightened. Hannah, unaware of the scrutiny, kept moving. She delivered briefing folders, double-checked slides for the upcoming M&A presentation, and coordinated with IT to secure the encrypted drives. The company's rules about data security were drilled into every employee: no personal devices, no unlogged transfers, every USB tagged and signed out. Hannah followed them with meticulous care. She had learned early in life that rules, though confining, could also be a shield. By early afternoon, a storm of decisions swirled through the top floor. A deal worth billions hinged on a presentation scheduled in 48 hours. The team argued over last-minute changes, one executive storming out, another threatening delay. Hannah stepped into the room with her usual quietness, carrying updated charts. She laid them out smoothly, her voice low but clear as she explained the revisions. Andrew listened. The room settled. When the meeting ended, Andrew did something he rarely did. He turned to her, not as to an assistant, but as to a peer. "Stay for the prep session tomorrow," he said. His tone was casual, but it carried weight. Secretaries were never invited into strategy rehearsals. It was a small break in the wall, but in this world of hierarchy, it meant something. Hannah hesitated only a fraction of a second before nodding. She gathered the papers, heart steady on the outside, unsteady within. From across the corridor, Victoria saw the exchange. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. She had spent her life keeping her son's world orderly, untainted by sentiment. A secretary from a small Vermont town had no place in Carlyle Holdings' inner circle. As evening shadows lengthened across the skyscrapers, Hannah shut down her computer, packed her bag, and prepared to leave. She walked past the glass walls once more, catching her reflection again. Same hair, same tired eyes, same steady stride. Yet something was different. For the first time, she felt the faint tremor of being noticed not just as a worker, but as a woman. Behind her, in the darkened lounge, Victoria Carlyle's gaze lingered, cool and calculating. And in that gaze lay the first quiet warning of a battle that would soon reshape all their lives. Rain pressed against the tall windows, soft and steady, the kind of rain that made the city blur. Inside, Carlyle Holdings. The office lights glowed long past midnight. Hannah Whitaker set a steaming cup of black coffee on Andrew Carlyle's desk. The rich smell curled into the air, mingling with the faint hum of electronics. Andrew looked up briefly, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a moment their gazes held, not as boss and assistant, but as two people awake while the rest of the city slept. She moved back to her desk without a word. The storm outside tapped its rhythm against the glass, a metronome to the silence inside. She opened spreadsheets, double-checked contracts, and highlighted details that others might miss. She had learned long ago that details mattered, whether in balancing hospital bills for her father or keeping an empire's schedule intact. Andrew rubbed his temples, scrolling through pages of financial projections. His company was in the middle of the most significant merger of the decade, one that would define his legacy. The numbers were precise, the stakes enormous, but his mind wandered to the quiet efficiency of the woman a few feet away. Every time he looked up, she was there, calm, steady, carrying burdens he could only guess at. The days blurred into nights. Hannah stayed later than most, leaving only when Andrew finally pushed back from his desk. More than once she caught his reflection in the glass wall, standing behind her, watching as she typed. He never said much, only small acknowledgments, a nod, a word of thanks, but in the sterile world of corporate life, those acknowledgments felt like warmth. One Friday morning, after a week of storms, Andrew surprised her. "Breakfast?" he asked, already holding his coat. Hannah blinked, uncertain. He clarified, "There's a diner down the block. Greasy coffee, better than whatever we've been drinking." The diner smelled of bacon and maple syrup, the kind of place where farmers once sat before dawn. Hannah smiled faintly as she wrapped her hands around the chipped mug of coffee. "This feels closer to home," she admitted. When Andrew asked where home was, she told him about Maple Ridge, Vermont, about autumn leaves so bright they looked painted, about maple sugaring in March, when smoke from sugar shacks hung in the air. She even laughed softly at the memory of childhood mittens stiff with sugar crystals. Andrew listened, really listened, as if the weight of mergers and stock prices had slipped away. He watched the way her eyes softened when she spoke of her father's orchard, of evenings spent by the wood stove. For the first time in years, he felt the corner of his mouth lift into a real smile, unforced and unguarded, Hannah noticed. And for the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Back at the office, reality returned. Carlyle Holdings had strict rules. No personal relationships between executives and their staff. A single rumor could ripple through the markets, knocking billions from the company's value. The financial press circled constantly, hungry for scandal. Hannah reminded herself of this as she typed up Andrew's schedule. Still, the memory of his smile lingered, tucked away like a secret in her chest. Victoria Carlyle, ever watchful, noticed changes in her son's routine. She noticed when he lingered near Hannah's desk, when he softened his tone in her presence. Suspicion became certainty. Discreetly, she assigned someone from security to observe. In her world, sentiment was weakness, and weakness threatened the dynasty she had built. The weeks rolled on, heavy with deadlines. Late nights became a rhythm. Sometimes Hannah brought Andrew a sandwich she had picked up on her way back from errands. Sometimes he returned the favor, leaving a small note of thanks beside her keyboard. It was never much, but in the sterile hum of fluorescent light, those moments glowed. One evening, after another grueling session with lawyers, Andrew leaned against the window and stared out at the rain-washed city. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what it would be like to have a life that wasn't this?" Hannah hesitated. She thought of Maple Ridge, of her father's failing health, of the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home. She thought of how little space there was in her life for dreams. Still, she answered honestly, all the time. The silence stretched, full of things neither dared say. Andrew broke it with resolve. "After the presentation next week, I'm going to speak to the board about us." Hannah's heart jolted. She knew what us meant, even though it had never been spoken aloud. A part of her thrilled at the courage in his voice. Another part warned of the rules, the press, and above all, Victoria. She forced herself to breathe slowly, hiding the tremor in her hands. Andrew straightened, already reaching for his phone, already planning. His mind, always trained to control outcomes, had made a decision. For once, it was not about profits or shareholders. What neither of them saw was the shadow of power moving against them. Victoria had already begun her preparations. She knew how to bend policies, how to arrange evidence, how to bury reputations. If her son would not protect the dynasty, she would. That night, as Hannah gathered her coat and left the tower, she felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. For the first time in years, the door to love seemed to open. Yet behind her, in the glass corridors, the hinges of power creaked. A door can open gently, or it can slam shut with force. And in that fragile moment, Hannah could not know which awaited her. The office had thinned by the time Hannah gathered her things. Most of the team had already slipped into elevators, their voices fading down the polished corridors. She reached for her bag and noticed something odd. It felt heavier than when she had carried it in. She frowned, opening the flap. Nestled between her worn wallet and the spiral notebook she carried everywhere was a sleek black USB drive she had never seen before. Her heart gave a hard thud. She turned it over in her fingers. It was the same brand the company used for encrypted data transfers, marked with the corporate insignia. But she had not signed one out. She had not even touched the secure storage room that day. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had put it there. The fluorescent lights above hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a printer clicked to life. She slipped the USB back into her bag and tried to steady her breathing. She told herself she would figure it out tomorrow. She only needed to get home, get out of the building, and think. But the system had already moved faster than her thoughts. In the security control room, an alert flashed across the monitors. Unusual data transfer flagged under Hannah Whitaker's employee ID. Files labeled as sensitive, tied to the ongoing merger, appeared as if copied. Alongside them, an electronic trail of a wire transfer, large, precise, enough to suggest a bribe had been logged. Within minutes, the call went out. Bring her in. Owen Blake, head of security, rubbed his forehead as he looked at the order. He knew Hannah by reputation. Always punctual, always professional, polite to a fault. Not the type to steal, but Victoria Carlisle's voice on the phone was sharp. No exceptions. Document everything. Owen had worked for the Carlisles long enough to know what that tone meant. He wrote up the incident report, his pen scratching reluctantly. His eyes flicked once to the security cameras, grainy footage of Hannah moving through the building. Nothing unusual. Still, the protocol was clear. The report had to match the evidence placed in her bag. Meanwhile, Andrew Carlisle was still at his desk, unaware of the storm building beneath him. He reviewed slides for the board presentation, notes Hannah had prepared earlier. He noticed her desk lamp was still on, though she should have left by now. The thought struck him with a faint unease. Then the knock came. A pair of guards stepped into his office. "Sir, we need to inform you. Ms. Whitaker has been flagged in a breach." Andrew's chair scraped back. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "Evidence was found. USB device. Unauthorized transfer." The words clanged like iron in the room. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, yet years of leading a corporation had drilled into him the importance of procedure. No one was above suspicion. Not even the woman who had been at his side through every late night. Every crisis. Hannah was halfway to the elevators when the guards intercepted her. Their faces were blank, trained for neutrality. "Ms. Whitaker, we'll need you to come with us." Her pulse jumped. What for standard procedure? Around them, a few remaining employees paused, whispering. Hannah felt their stares, sharp and cutting. She thought of explaining, of protesting, but the words tangled in her throat. The sight of the black USB in one guard's gloved hand froze her. They escorted her down the hall, her heels clicking against the tile in a rhythm that sounded too loud. Colleagues looked away. No one stepped forward. Andrew appeared in the corridor, striding fast. His expression was unreadable. "What's happening here?" he demanded. "Evidence of a breach," one guard replied. Andrew's eyes locked on Hannah. For a second, she saw the doubt flicker. That flicker pierced deeper than any accusation. "Andrew," she tried, her voice low, urgent. "I didn't." But protocol crushed her words. The guards guided her past him, toward the elevator. He didn't move. He didn't defend. He stood caught between instinct and duty won. The elevator doors closed. Hannah stood inside, hands shaking, heart breaking. Downstairs, she was taken into a sterile room, white walls humming with air vents. They questioned her briefly. Did she take the USB? Did she access the files? Did she know about the transfer? Her denials sounded weak against the paper they laid before her. The log stamped with her ID, hours blurred. Finally, the door opened, and Victoria Carlisle herself stepped in. She wore no expression but control. "You will not be arrested," Victoria said evenly. "The company prefers to avoid scandal, but you will resign. Quietly. Sign the documents, and this will end." Hannah stared at the papers slid across the table. A resignation letter, already typed, her name at the top. "This is mercy," Victoria added, her voice smooth as glass. "Take it, and you walk away. Fight it, and you will be destroyed. Mercy." The word twisted in Hannah's chest. Her hands lay flat on the table. She thought of Maple Ridge, of her father's failing body in a small-town hospital bed. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone, asking if she was eating enough. She thought of every morning she had walked into this building, steady, quiet, believing hard work would protect her. It had taken only one planted USB to strip it all away. She lifted her eyes and met Victoria's gaze. Cold, certain, unyielding. In that moment, Hannah knew she stood at a crossroads. Sign and vanish. or resist and be crushed. The hum of the vents filled the silence. The weight of the choice pressed down, heavier than any bag she had ever carried. And as she sat there, heart pounding, the first threads of her old life began to unravel. The rain had not stopped all evening. It streaked the windows of Penn Station, dripping down in thin lines that blurred the lights outside. Hannah Whitaker pulled her coat tighter, though the damp had already soaked through. She clutched her ticket like it was the last solid thing she owned. Beneath her palm, pressed flat against her body, she carried a secret one she had only begun to understand. A life was growing inside her, small but certain, demanding a kind of courage she was not sure she had. Her termination had been swift. No charges filed, no police escort, only whispers in the hallways, and an escorted walk out of Carlisle Holdings. Evidence was too thin for court, but thick enough to ruin a reputation. Her badge was deactivated before she even reached the street. In the official record, she would look like one more employee who broke trust and paid the price. Andrew Carlisle had said nothing. She had searched his eyes that last day, looking for a flicker of belief, for the man who had smiled at her in a diner. But he had turned away. Trapped between loyalty to the truth she spoke and loyalty to the empire his mother demanded he protect, his silence cut deeper than any accusation. It was silence that built a canyon between them, wide and final. So Hannah had packed what she could into a single suitcase, a few dresses, a stack of notebooks, and her father's old flannel shirt, soft with years of wear. She left her apartment key on the counter. There was no one left in New York to miss her. At the station, she found a seat on the hard wooden bench, the smell of wet concrete mixed with the acrid scent of burnt coffee from the vendor's stall. Over the loudspeaker, trains were announced, numbers and times rolling past without meaning. She stared down at her ticket, Maple Ridge, Vermont. The name felt both foreign and familiar. She had left the town to build something bigger, to prove she was more than a girl from a fading orchard. Now she was returning, not as proof of success, but as someone who had been broken open. A family with 2 young children bustled nearby, their voices echoing in the cavernous hall. Hannah's hand rested gently over her stomach. She thought of the child she carried, not a mistake, not a burden, but a reason to go on. The decision had already been made in her heart. She would keep this baby. She would raise it with whatever strength she had left. When her train was called, she rose slowly. The wheels of her suitcase rattled against the tiles. She boarded among strangers, sliding into a seat by the window. Outside, the city looked washed out in the rain, its towers like shadows. The train lurched, then rolled forward. The sound of metal against metal filled the cabin, steady and unrelenting. Hannah leaned her forehead against the cool glass. She had no job, no lover, no place in the shining towers she had once thought were hers to climb. But she had her name, her dignity, and the beating heart inside her. Tears blurred her vision. She let them fall, quiet in the darkness, while the train carried her away from everything she had lost. Hours later, the rhythm of the tracks grew hypnotic. The smell of damp wool from her coat, the soft murmur of other passengers, the occasional cry of a child all wrapped around her like a fragile cocoon. She thought of Marjorie Hale, the retired journalist who had known her since childhood. Marjorie's letters had always ended with the same words, "Come home when you need to. My door is open." Now, Hannah would test the truth of those words. The train thundered over bridges and wound past small towns where windows glowed warm against the night. Hannah pictured the house in Maple Ridge, its wooden porch sagging a little, the smell of apples stored in the cellar, the crackle of a wood stove. She imagined herself there, holding her child, learning how to breathe again. For a moment, the image steadied her. Then the weight of the present returned. She thought of Andrew, how close he had come to choosing her, how quickly he had let her go. She tried to push him from her mind, but grief lingered like smoke after fire. The train slowed at a junction. Hannah pressed her hand tighter to her belly. "We'll be all right," she whispered to the child she carried, though fear rippled through her. She had no plan, no savings worth speaking of. What she had was determination, and a fierce resolve not to let this child inherit the same silence she had endured. When the train picked up speed again, Hannah closed her eyes. She listened to the wheels grinding against the rails, a rhythm both harsh and constant. The sounds seemed to say forward, forward. In the reflection of the window, her face looked pale, her eyes rimmed with shadows. Yet behind the exhaustion was something unbroken. She had been stripped of position, judged unfairly, cast aside by the man she trusted. But she would not surrender the one thing no one could take from her, the choice to stand back up. The rain eased as the train left the city behind. Darkness stretched wider, pierced only by the occasional farmhouse light. Hannah let herself imagine Vermont air, crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of pine. She pictured Marjorie waiting, arms folded, a cup of tea already on the table. The train pressed north, and with every mile the old life slipped further away. She rested her hand on her stomach, tears drying on her cheeks. She had lost everything, and yet, in the quiet hum of the night, she realized she had gained a new beginning. The wheels clattered on, steady as a heartbeat, and somewhere ahead, in a town she once left behind, a wooden door was waiting to open. The maple trees had turned red and gold, their leaves drifting down to cover the porch in a bright quilt. Hannah Whitaker stood in the kitchen of a small wooden house, whisking pancake batter in a chipped ceramic bowl. Outside, the crisp air carried the smell of apples from nearby orchards. Inside, 2 pairs of small feet pattered across the worn floorboards. Evan, Rose, she called with a smile. The twins appeared, hair tousled, cheeks flushed with the restless energy of 9-year-olds. They tugged at her apron, eager for breakfast. In this kitchen, with the old stove humming and laughter spilling through the air, Hannah felt a sense of home she had once thought lost. Life in Maple Ridge had grown from ashes. In the years after leaving New York, she leaned on Marjorie Hale, the retired journalist who had opened her door without question. Marjorie was stern but kind, teaching Hannah not only how to manage a household on little, but also how to stand tall when the world tried to bend her. Dignity, Marjorie often said, isn't given. It's practiced, one choice at a time. The twins grew like saplings in fertile soil. They spent afternoons in the town library, curled on soft chairs with books piled high beside them. On Saturdays, they followed Hannah to the old bookstore, where the owner saved dog-eared novels just for them. Summers meant apple picking, running through rows of trees with baskets swinging from their arms. Autumns meant pressing cider, the sweet scent filling the air. Hannah found her own rhythm too. She worked part-time at the community center, helping mothers who carried stories not unlike her own women raising children alone, holding families together with thin thread. She organized food drives, learned how to manage grants, and became someone others leaned on. Maple Ridge began to see her not as the girl who left for the city and failed, but as a woman who had returned stronger, with purpose. Still, in quiet moments, Hannah's thoughts drifted to the life she had left behind. She rarely spoke Andrew's name, not even to Marjorie, but sometimes, when Evan tilted his head a certain way, or Rose smiled with a familiar curve of the mouth, the memory pressed sharp against her heart. She never let the children see her sadness. They only saw her steady hands and the certainty that they were loved. One evening, as Hannah closed up the community center after a long day, she noticed a man leaning against the lamppost outside. His shoulders were broad, his hair graying at the temples. Recognition came slowly. Owen Blake. Years ago, he had been head of security at Carlisle Holdings. Now, here he was, standing in the small town as if no time had passed. He greeted her with a nod, his voice low. "I've been meaning to find you." Suspicion tightened her chest. Why? He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. Because some things were left unfinished. Hannah took it with hesitation. Inside were photographs, grainy, dark, but clear enough. A figure moving in a restricted area of the Carlisle building on the night of her disgrace. The timestamp matched the moment her ID had been flagged. In the shadows of the photo was the outline of a woman. Her breath caught. The height, the silhouette, the unmistakable presence it was not hers. Owen also handed her a folded piece of paper, his old logbook from that night. The entry showed her ID had been scanned at a time she was already logged elsewhere. A contradiction, buried but not erased. Hannah's hands trembled. She pressed the envelope to her chest, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Relief that proof existed, that she had not been mad to believe in her innocence. Dread because the shadow in the photo looked eerily like Victoria Carlyle. She carried the envelope home in silence, her children skipping ahead, oblivious. That night, when they were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table under the dim light. Marjorie joined her, reading the papers carefully. "This," Marjorie said at last, "is a spark. If handled right, it can light the truth. If handled wrong, it can burn you all over again." Hannah nodded. She had rebuilt too much to let her children's world shatter. But the questions pressed hard. Why had Owen kept this for so long? Why bring it now? The answer arrived 2 weeks later, tucked into Marjorie's mail. An elegant envelope, embossed with silver. It was an invitation, Andrew Carlyle and Sloane Harrington, wedding to be held in the Hamptons. The paper trembled in Hannah's hands. Her children's father, the man who had once promised to stand by her, marrying another, under the eyes of society. She looked at Evan and Rose, who were playing by the hearth, their laughter rising like music. They had no idea. Hannah pressed the invitation flat against the table. Vermont had given her peace, but the past had not finished with her. Some doors closed gently, others swung back open when least expected. And with this invitation, the life she thought she had left behind was calling her back. The road stretched along the Atlantic, a ribbon of light under the morning sun. Salt hung in the air, sharp and clean. Waves struck the shore in a steady rhythm, their sound carrying even through the car windows. Hannah Whitaker kept her hands tight on the steering wheel. Beside her, Marjorie Hale sat upright, eyes narrowed against the glare. In the back seat, Evan held his mother's hand, his small voice breaking the silence. "Is the man in that picture the same one? Mom?" Hannah's breath caught. Rose, wrapped in her knitted scarf, looked out at the rows of white wedding tents rising like sails along the coast. She answered softly, "We'll talk soon, sweetheart." The invitation had come weeks ago, formal and polished, announcing the union of Andrew Carlyle and Sloane Harrington. Marjorie had pressed the card into Hannah's hand with firm resolve. "You're going," she said, "not as a guest, but as my assistant. They can't question it, and if there's ever a moment to confront truth, it's when lies gather under one roof." Hannah had resisted. The thought of walking into Andrew's world again after 10 years turned her stomach. But Owen Blake had returned with more than just photographs. He had shown her the old security logs, entries that contradicted the evidence used to exile her. He had whispered that the order to bury those logs had come directly from a woman at the top. Hannah had no illusions about who that woman was. Now the car turned onto the long drive leading to the Harrington estate. The house stood white and grand against the blue sky, its lawns crowded with tables draped in silk. Strings of musicians tuned their instruments, the first notes floating like glass over the sea breeze. Guests in bright dresses and sharp suits strolled across the grounds, their laughter as crisp as the champagne being poured. Hannah's throat tightened. She thought of Maple Ridge wood smoke, cider presses, hand-me-down coats. Here everything gleamed, polished and distant. She adjusted her simple navy dress, hoping it looked respectable enough. Beside her, Marjorie leaned close, head high. She murmured, "You don't owe them shame." Still, shame pressed against Hannah's ribs like a stone. She felt the envelope with Owen's documents heavy in her bag. Truth was power, but power was dangerous. One wrong move, and her children's lives could be torn open. Inside the tent, chandeliers sparkled, their crystals catching the sunlight. A quartet began to play. Guests turned to admire the bride in her silk gown, her smile flawless for the photographers. Sloane Harrington glided through her circle of friends, every inch the heiress. Hannah lingered at the edge of the crowd, the twins close by. Evan clutched her hand tightly, his eyes darting around the room. Rose, quieter, pressed her scarf against her lips, watching with solemn curiosity, and then it happened. Across the expanse of flowers and silk, Andrew Carlyle looked up. His eyes swept the room, then stopped, for a heartbeat. The noise of the wedding fell away. Hannah felt it before she fully understood it, the jolt of recognition, the crack of old walls breaking. His gaze met hers, steady and unguarded. 10 years collapsed into a single moment, and the weight of everything unsaid came rushing back. She froze. She could not move, could not breathe. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Andrew's face shifted, disbelief melting into something deeper. His hand, still resting on a glass, trembled just enough to spill a drop of champagne. In that gaze, Hannah saw the man she had once known, the man who had smiled at her in a diner, who had asked her what life beyond the towers might be like. She also saw the man who had turned away when she needed him most. The two selves collided in her memory, leaving her shaken. Marjorie's voice broke through the silence. Steady. Hannah? But Hannah could not steady herself. Her children stood at her side, their eyes curious. They had seen the photo in Owen's envelope. They had whispered questions she had avoided. And now, under the bright chandeliers of a Hampton's wedding, they looked between their mother and the man staring back at her. Rose tugged gently at Hannah's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "is that him?" The quartet played on, the bride's smile never faltering, the guests unaware, but Hannah knew the hinges of her life had turned again. The sea wind pressed against the tent walls. Evan and Rose drew closer, whispering to each other in the way children do, preparing to ask their question not with judgment, but with the simple honesty of hearts that deserve truth. And Hannah realized, with a chill that went bone deep, that the past was no longer buried. It had walked straight into the present, demanding to be faced. The string quartet struck the first notes, violins lifting into the warm September air. Guests turned their heads toward the aisle lined with roses. At the edge of the crowd, Rose tilted her face up to her mother. "Is that him?" she whispered. The words carried further than a whisper should. Hannah felt the air around her shift, as if the whole garden had heard. Before she could answer, Evan slipped from her grasp. His small shoes tapped against the flagstone path. Rose followed, clutching her scarf. In seconds, both children stood in the aisle, their eyes fixed on the man at the altar. Andrew Carlyle froze. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some leaned forward, some gasped. The resemblance was undeniable, the boy's steady jaw, the girl's gray-blue eyes. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. Sloane Harrington faltered mid-step. The perfect smile cracked. Her bouquet dipped, petals trembling. Victoria Carlyle rose from her chair, color draining from her face, then flooding back in a dangerous flush. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she gripped the armrest, rigid with fury. Andrew's glass slipped from his hand and shattered silently in the grass. He didn't move. He only stared. His gaze locked on the two children who bore his reflection. Hannah's heart hammered. She wanted to run, to shield them, but her legs refused to move. Years of silence had burst open, and it was her children who had opened the door. Rose spoke first, her voice small but clear. "Mom said he used to smile like you." The crowd hushed, music faltered. Then Evan, braver, stepped forward. He looked straight at Andrew, his voice carrying through the still air. "Are you our dad?" The garden fell into silence. Even the sea seemed to pause. Andrew's lips parted, but no sound came. Shock rooted him in place. For a man who had commanded boardrooms and faced down governments, he stood powerless before the honesty of a child. Sloane's face crumpled. She turned sharply, searching for explanation, for denial, for anything that could undo what the guests had just seen. There was none. Victoria's fury cracked like thunder. "This is an intrusion," she snapped, her voice slicing the air. "Remove them." But before the guards could move, Marjorie Hale stepped into the aisle. Her frame was smaller now. age having curved her shoulders, but her presence carried weight. She placed herself between the children and the advancing staff. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice steady as stone. She drew the twins gently behind her. "They are children. You will not touch them." Hannah finally found her strength. She moved to her children, pulling them close, her arms trembling. The stares of the crowd burned, some pitying, some scandalized, some sharp with curiosity. Andrew took a step forward at last. His eyes had changed, shocked still, but softer, almost broken. He looked at Hannah, not the guests, not his mother, not Sloane, just Hannah. Memories flashed between them in that silent look, the diner, the rain, the night she had been escorted out with a planted USB. A decade of distance collapsed into the space between one heartbeat and the next. But, before he could speak, Marjorie raised her hand. She held up a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, its edges worn. "Enough of whispers," she said. "It's time for truth." The guests shifted uneasily. Photographers lowered their cameras, sensing something bigger than gossip. Marjorie's voice cut through the tense air. "This belongs in the library, not the garden, not the tabloids." Victoria's glare sharpened. "Marjorie, this is not your stage." "No," Marjorie replied. "It's theirs, and they deserve more than spectacle." Evan and Rose pressed close to Hannah, their small hands gripping her dress. Rose's whisper reached her ear. "Mom, please, can we know Hannah kissed her daughter's hair?" Heartbreaking. She could no longer keep the walls up, not when truth was staring at them with Andrew's eyes. Andrew took another step, his voice low, almost pleading. "Hannah." But Marjorie's hand stopped him. She turned toward the manor, its tall windows reflecting the restless sea. "The library," she said firmly. "If you are all to face this, then face it as grown people, not as gossip at a wedding." The quartet had gone silent. Guests stood awkwardly, torn between leaving and staying. The bride, the groom, the mother, the secretary, the mentor, the children. The story was no longer confined to whispers. It was breaking open. Hannah gathered her children, holding them close, her body shielding them from the gaze of the crowd. She followed Marjorie's steady lead toward the manor. Andrew hesitated only a second before stepping down from the altar. Victoria remained seated, her knuckles white against her pearls. Fury radiated from her, but beneath it a shadow of fear flickered. The garden remained hushed as the strange procession moved toward the library doors. Guests craned their necks, but no one dared interrupt. At the threshold, Marjorie paused. She turned back to the crowd. "Let them have privacy," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "This is not a show." Then the doors closed behind them, and in that quiet, with chandeliers dim and truth heavy in the air, the past prepared to face its reckoning. The heavy doors of the library closed with a thud, shutting out the whispers of the crowd. The scent of old oak and sea salt filled the air, mingling in a way that spoke of both permanence and decay. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that seemed to watch silently as the living drama unfolded. On the center table lay the envelope Marjorie Hale had carried. She opened it with careful hands and slid out the contents. Photographs, logs, timestamps, the evidence that had been hidden for more than a decade. Owen Blake stepped forward, his face shadowed by the weight of years. That night, he began, voice steady. "I was head of security. I logged every entry, every exit. What I saw didn't match what the system recorded, and I was told to keep quiet." He laid the logbook open on the table. The handwriting was precise, his initials beside each entry. One page showed Hannah's ID badge recorded in 2 places at once impossible unless tampered with. Next to it, a grainy photo, a figure moving through the restricted corridor. The frame caught enough detail to suggest a woman of tall stature, her hair swept in a familiar style. Not Hannah. Hannah felt her breath catch. The shape was too close, too recognizable. Victoria Carlyle's silhouette. Andrew leaned in, His hands braced on the table. He studied the evidence with eyes that no longer held doubt, only dawning horror. Victoria straightened in her chair. Her pearls gleamed under the chandelier. "This proves nothing," she said, her voice sharp. "Grainy shadows, old notes. You would take the word of a man who left this company in disgrace." Owen did not flinch. "I left because I couldn't stomach orders that betrayed the truth. You know what you told me that night. Do your job and forget what you saw." Silence followed. The only sound was the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Sloane Harrington's voice broke next, trembling. "Andrew," she said, eyes darting from the photos to his face. This isn't the time. We can make this go away. We can move forward." Andrew turned to her. Whatever gentleness had once existed between them was gone. "Move forward with what a life built on lies." His words were quiet, but the finality in them was unmistakable. Sloane's hands trembled around her bouquet. She set it down, petals scattering, and walked quickly from the room. Her heels clicked against the marble until the sound faded into the hall. Andrew faced his mother. His voice shook not with weakness, but with fury contained too long. "You framed her? You destroyed her life. You let me believe she betrayed me." Victoria's mask slipped, just for an instant. "I did what was necessary," she said, softer now, "to protect you, to protect this family, by tearing apart the only family I could have had." Andrew shot back. Hannah stood very still, her children pressed against her sides. She wanted to shield them from the ugliness, but she knew they were old enough to feel the weight of truth. Andrew's eyes found hers at last. They were raw, unguarded, filled with regret. "Hannah," he said, voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I should have fought for you." The years between them hung heavy. She shook her head gently. "Sorry doesn't raise children. Sorry doesn't rebuild what was taken." He stepped closer, desperation in every line of his body. "Then let me do more than say it. Let me prove it. Give me the chance to stand beside you, to stand beside them." His gaze flicked toward Evan and Rose, who stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Hannah swallowed hard. The part of her that had once loved him wanted to believe, but the part that had survived without him knew better. "You don't win back trust with words," she said quietly. "You earn it with action. If you want to be part of their lives, if you want to be part of mine, you'll have to show us. Not as Andrew Carlisle, the CEO, not as the son of Victoria Carlisle, as a father, as a man." The words hung in the air, unshakable. Andrew's shoulders dropped, a weight of realization pressing down. He nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll do. Behind them." Victoria shifted, fury simmering beneath her composure, but the room no longer belonged to her. The tide had turned. The mantel clock ticked on. The old library smelled of wood and salt, of history and reckoning. Hannah pulled her children close, her heart trembling but firm. Andrew had spoken, now he would have to act. For the first time in years, she felt the balance of power shift not in boardrooms or under chandeliers, but in the simple truth of a mother demanding proof, not promises. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs to choose. The sun rose pale and slow over the Vermont fields, a thin mist clinging to the ground. Frost glistened on the grass, catching the light like scattered glass. Hannah pulled back the curtain of the kitchen window and saw Andrew Carlisle's car in the drive. Right on time, 7 o'clock sharp. He stepped out holding a paper bag, his breath clouding in the cold. A bag of bagels, plain and sesame, from the town bakery, in his other hand. The laces of Evan's sneakers dangled loose. Andrew knelt awkwardly on the porch steps, trying to tie them as the boy wiggled impatiently. His fingers fumbled, but he tried again, slower, steadier. From the kitchen, Hannah watched, her heart pulled in two directions, resentment for the years lost, and a reluctant softness at the sight of this man trying, clumsy but earnest. Life settled into a rhythm. Andrew began visiting regularly, never late, never leaving early. Dinners were simple pasta with jarred sauce, grilled cheese with tomato soup, pancakes when Hannah was too tired to cook. He sat at the table with the children, listening as they chattered about school projects and playground adventures. At first, he interrupted, trying to solve problems before they were even finished telling them. But slowly, he learned to listen, really listen. When Rose described a book she loved, he asked questions instead of offering advice. When Evan confessed he had struggled with math, Andrew leaned in and said, "Show me," and they worked through problems together at the worn wooden table. One evening, he knocked a glass of milk across the floor, the liquid spreading fast. The old Andrew might have snapped at staff for the mess. This Andrew crouched down, grabbed a rag, and cleaned until the wood was dry. Then he looked up at the twins and said, "Sorry about that. Clumsy hands." Rose giggled, and Evan shook his head, amused that the powerful man could spill milk like any other father. Winter came early that year. A storm swept through, leaving the town buried in white. On a Saturday afternoon, Evan begged to play near the frozen pond behind Marjorie's house. Andrew agreed, but promised to watch closely. The air was sharp, the snow deep. Evan ran too far ahead, chasing his own laughter, and slipped near the thin ice. The sound of cracking froze Hannah's blood. She shouted, panic sharp in her throat. But Andrew moved fast. He reached Evan, pulling him back before the ice could give way. He dropped to his knees in the snow, wrapping the boy in his coat, his voice calm despite the terror in his eyes. "It's all right. I've got you," he murmured, holding Evan close. "I should have stopped you sooner. That's on me." Later, back in the warm house, Evan leaned against him, shaken but safe. Hannah handed Andrew a blanket. Their eyes met hers, full of fear and anger, his full of remorse. For once, he didn't argue. He simply said, "I was careless. I won't let it happen again." The children began to trust him. Small gestures built the bridge. Rose slipped her hand into his when they walked to town. Evan started asking if Andrew would come to his soccer games. At night, when Andrew read aloud from the same old copy of Charlotte's Web, their laughter filled the house. Hannah watched carefully. She kept her boundaries firm, reminding herself that love had burned her once before, but she couldn't deny the way her children's eyes lit up when Andrew arrived, or the way his face softened when they leaned against him. A seed of hope pushed against the walls she had built. Then came the shadow. News spread fast in small towns. A reporter's car was spotted at the diner, and whispers started at the grocery store. "Carlisle twins," someone murmured near the checkout line. Headlines began to circle online. "The Billionaire's secret children." Hannah's stomach twisted when she saw the first article. Grainy photos of her children taken without consent. She slammed her laptop shut, fury rising. That evening, she confronted Andrew at the kitchen table. "This is why I kept them hidden," she said, her voice low but shaking. "I will not let them become pawns in your world." Andrew tried to argue, tried to promise he would protect them, but she held up her hand. "No more promises. If you want to be their father, you protect them with actions. If you can't, you step away." Her words cut, but they were true. The twins, overhearing more than she wished, huddled close to her that night. She kissed their heads, whispering that she would always keep them safe. Andrew stood in the doorway, silent, the weight of choice pressing down on him. The empire he had built waited in New York, but here, in Vermont, two children were beginning to see him not as a CEO, but as a father. The mantel clock ticked in the quiet house. Hannah's arms circled her children. Andrew's hands clenched at his sides. The choice hung heavy: family or power. The road ahead demanded he finally decide. The conference room on the top floor was silent, except for the scratch of Andrew Carlisle's pen. He signed his name with deliberate strokes on a sheet of paper that would change everything. The sound of ink on paper was steady, final, like a vow spoken aloud. It was his letter of temporary resignation. He placed the pen down carefully and lifted his eyes to the board of directors seated before him. Men and women in tailored suits shifted uncomfortably. unused to seeing him like this. He had always been the unshakable one, the commanding figure at the head of the table. Today, he looked like a man who had made peace with surrender. "I am stepping back," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm, effective immediately. "I'm delegating operational control to the executive committee. This company will not falter. It will endure without me." A stir of whispers spread. One board member leaned forward. "Andrew, with respect, you are Carlyle Holdings. You built this empire. Why now?" He folded his hands. "Because no empire is worth more than integrity. No throne is worth more than family." He gestured to the folder beside him. Inside was the new ethics charter he had spent nights drafting. Clear language, hard rules, no exceptions for power or privilege. "This company has lived too long in shadows," he continued. "Starting now, every transaction, every decision will be transparent, and the audit into the breach 10 years ago will be independent, no matter where it leads." Another murmur moved through the room, sharper this time. They all knew where it would lead, toward the woman who had once ruled them all, but Victoria Carlyle. Andrew didn't flinch. He thought of Hannah's face, steady but guarded. He thought of Evan and Rose, eyes bright with trust he had only begun to earn. That thought gave him strength. He pulled another envelope from his briefcase. "I have established a trust for my children, irrevocable, protected. Their futures will not depend on this board or on me. They will stand free." A younger director frowned. "And Ms. Whitaker." Andrew held the man's gaze. "She is under full legal protection. Her name will be cleared. Her years of silence will end." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then he rose. "I owe you all an apology," he said, scanning their faces, "for the times I put profit before principle, for allowing fear of scandal to silence truth, but most of all, for forgetting that leadership is not domination. It is responsibility. If Carlyle Holdings is to have a future, it will be one that stands on honesty. Or not at all." A hand shot up. "The press will tear this apart," someone warned. Andrew shook his head. "They won't hear it from me. Not yet. I will not use my children as shields, nor feed them to gossip. This is an internal reckoning. The rest can wait." The board members shifted again, some uneasy, others nodding slowly, and then, in a moment that shocked them all, Andrew stepped back from the head chair. He left it empty, its leather gleaming under the lights. The throne he had occupied for decades no longer held him. Gasps rippled. For the first time in memory, the seat of Carlyle Holdings stood vacant. Andrew gathered his papers, tucked them into his briefcase, and walked toward the door. Every eye followed him, some with respect, some with disbelief, a few with quiet admiration. As he reached the threshold, he paused. "I am not disappearing," he said softly. "I am redefining what it means to lead. If that costs me power, so be it. I would rather be a father than a king." He left the room, the sound of the door closing echoing like a final gavel. Outside, the city glittered in the afternoon sun. Andrew drew a long breath. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders lifted. He was no longer bound to his mother's empire, no longer chained to the throne. That evening, he drove back to Vermont. The little house glowed with warm light against the dusk. Through the window, he saw Hannah at the stove, Rose setting forks at the table. Evan bent over a book. The sight filled him with something deeper than triumph peace. Inside, dinner was simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The conversation was light, full of small stories from school and laughter at silly mistakes. Andrew listened, added his own clumsy jokes, and felt more at home than he had ever felt in the marble halls of power. When the children had gone to bed, he stood with Hannah on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered across the sky. He spoke quietly. "I stepped down today. Not forever, but long enough to make things right. For them, for us." Hannah studied him. Her eyes searched for signs of truth, for cracks of weakness. She found none. "I want to believe you," she said softly. But belief is not enough. If we build anything, we build it together. Not with you saving me, not with me standing in your shadow, side by side, equal. Andrew nodded, his throat tight, side by side, he promised. The night settled around them, still and steady. For the first time, Hannah let herself imagine it might be true. The summer evening was soft, the kind that lingered like a blessing. Fireflies glowed among the tall grass, and the orchard hummed with the quiet sound of insects. From the porch, Hannah stepped down onto the lawn, her bare feet brushing against cool blades. A string of warm light stretched between the apple trees, casting a golden glow. Andrew was waiting. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, though he tried to hide it. His eyes glistened in the light, and when he saw her, his breath caught. Inside the house, Evan and Rose set the table. Dinner was simple roasted chicken, sweet corn, biscuits brushed with butter. They had insisted on helping, proud of every small task. The scent drifted through the open windows, mingling with the smell of apples. When Hannah joined them, the four sat down together. Conversation was light, full of laughter about Rose's reading contest and Evan's soccer game. Andrew listened, his gaze moving from the children to Hannah, as if memorizing the moment. After dinner, he rose. His chair scraped gently against the floor. He walked to the porch, then into the orchard. Hannah followed, uncertain, her heart quickening. The children stayed by the door, sensing something important. Andrew stopped beneath the string of lights. His hand reached into his pocket, then drew out a small velvet box. He held it with reverence, his fingers shaking. "Hannah," he began, his voice rough. "I've spent years learning how much I lost the day I let you go. I don't deserve forgiveness for all of it, but I hope to earn it, step by step, not only for you, but for them." He nodded toward the children watching from the porch. He opened the box. Inside lay a ring, simple yet beautiful, its gold worn smooth with age. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said softly. "It was lost for years. I found it, and I want you to have it, not because of its worth, but because it carries history. And I want our history to be one of choosing each other, every day." Tears burned Hannah's eyes. The orchard seemed to hold its breath. Andrew dropped to one knee, the grass brushing against his trousers. "Will you let me be your husband, not just in name, but in action? Will you let me be their father, not by blood alone, but by choice, every day, for the rest of our lives?" Silence wrapped around them. Hannah's hands trembled. For so long, she had guarded her heart, protecting herself and the children from disappointment. Yet here was Andrew, not the man from the glass tower, but one who had learned to kneel in humility. Before she could answer, Evan ran forward. Rose followed, her scarf trailing. They stood beside their mother, eyes wide with hope. Rose whispered, "Mom, say yes." Evan, braver, said, "But if we do this, we need rules. A family should have rules." Andrew smiled through tears. "Tell me." The children exchanged glances, then recited as if they had been planning it all along. "No walking away when we're angry. Tell the truth when we're scared. And always stop to listen, even if it's hard." Andrew nodded, his heart breaking and healing at once. "Then I promise. Those will be our family rules." Hannah knelt beside her children, her hand brushing their hair. She looked at Andrew, still on one knee, holding out the ring with trembling faith. Her voice was soft but steady. "Yes, but with one condition." His eyes lifted, searching hers. "Anything." She reached for the box, her fingers brushing his. "We build a foundation not just for us, for others too. A fund in Marjorie Hale's name, to help single mothers who stand where I once stood. If we rise with them." For a moment, Andrew couldn't speak. Then he nodded, emotion tightening his voice. "Done. We'll make it happen. Together." Hannah slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been waiting all along. Andrew rose, drawing her into his arms. Evan and Rose wrapped themselves around them both, the four standing together beneath the apple trees, beneath the warm light strung like stars. The orchard was filled with the sound of their laughter, soft and steady, like the promise of a future. There would be a wedding, small and simple, not in a grand hall, but in the heart of their town. But tonight was already a covenant, hands intertwined. They stood as one family, bound not by power or wealth, but by the choice to stay, to listen, to love. And in that orchard, under the summer sky, a new chapter quietly began. The wooden church at the edge of Maple Ridge was dressed in simplicity. Pine beams framed the small sanctuary. The faint scent of resin hung in the air, mixed with beeswax from the candles. Outside, apple blossoms drifted in the breeze, their petals falling like confetti. Inside, the organ played a gentle hymn. The pews were filled with townspeople who had watched Hannah Whitaker rebuild her life, and who now came to witness her new beginning. Hannah stepped into the aisle, her hands resting lightly on Evan's and Rose's shoulders. The children walked beside her, solemn and proud, their steps matching hers. She wore a cream dress, not extravagant, but lovely in its grace. The lace at her sleeves caught the sunlight streaming through stained glass. At the altar, Andrew Carlyle stood waiting. His suit was simple, his posture steady, but his eyes shimmered with tears he did not bother to hide. When Hannah came closer, his smile broke wide, raw with joy. The ceremony began with quiet words, spoken more like a prayer than a performance. The pastor asked them to join hands. Hannah felt the strength of Andrew's grip, not commanding, but steady, a promise that this time he would not let go. The legal documents were signed before the vows were spoken. Evan and Rose leaned close, watching carefully as Andrew's name was added to theirs, binding them as father and children in the eyes of the law. Hannah's heart swelled as the twins beamed. Rose whispered, "Now it's official." When Andrew vowed to be a husband, his voice shook. "I will not promise perfection," he said, "but I will promise presence. I will stand, I will listen, I will stay." Hannah's own vow mirrored his, not to be saved, but to walk beside, not to forget the past, but to build from it. The pastor blessed them, and applause filled the little church. In the back row, Marjorie Hale dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. She had seen too many stories end in silence. Today, one ended in truth. Victoria Carlyle was absent from the pews. Her name now filled court papers instead of invitations. The independent audit had laid bare her manipulation. She faced her consequences not with public words, but with a silence heavy as stone. From afar, she had sent a letter brief, unsigned an apology, too late to repair what she had broken. Hannah had read it once, then folded it away. Some wounds heal not by forgiveness, but by moving forward. Outside, sunlight bathed the churchyard. The community gathered under the open sky. Tables of food lined the grass. A banner hung across the yard. The Marjorie Hale Fund, supporting single mothers of New England. It had been launched that morning, seeded with Carlyle money, but guided by Hannah's vision. Mothers with children clung to her hands, already asking how they might join, how they might help. As dusk fell, Evan cleared his throat. Rose clutched her notebook. Together, they stepped forward. Their voices wavered but grew stronger as they read aloud the family rules. No walking away when angry. Tell the truth when afraid. Always stop to listen, even when it's hard. The crowd cheered softly, touched by the honesty of children. Andrew bent down, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "I'll remember." Then music began again. Not formal, just a fiddle and guitar played by neighbors. Couples took to the grass, their shoes brushing the earth. Hannah and Andrew joined. The twins pressed between them, moving in slow circles under the fading light. Laughter mingled with music. Fireflies sparked in the dark. Andrew held Hannah close, his voice low at her ear. "I spent years chasing crowns and contracts. Tonight, I know what home is. It isn't towers or titles. It's this. It's you. It's them." Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest without fear. As the dance slowed, the four stood hand in hand, a circle unbroken. Around them, the town clapped and cheered, not for wealth or power, but for a family that had chosen each other against all odds. The night deepened, stars spreading wide. The church bells rang once, twice, carrying over the orchards. There would be challenges ahead. Gossip might stir again. Life would not always be easy. But they had learned that home was not where walls sheltered them. It was where hearts decided to stay. Together, they walked back through the orchard, the lights strung between the trees glowing warm. The future stretched before them, uncertain yet full of promise. For Hannah, Andrew, Evan, and Rose, the story no longer began with loss. It began with the quiet strength of a family who had paid the cost of truth and found peace waiting on the other side. And in that little town, under the apple trees, they built the home they chose to never leave. In the end, Hannah's story reminds us that dignity is not something the world gives. It is something we choose to hold on to, even when everything else is stripped away. Betrayal, loss, and heartbreak are chapters most of us know too well. Yet what matters most is not the fall, but the way we rise from it. Andrew's journey shows that power and success mean little if they cost us the people we love. Titles fade, empires crumble, but the role of a father, a mother, a partner, those are the callings that last. Love is not proven in words, but in steady actions, in showing up day after day, especially when it is hardest to do so. And together, their story asks us a question: what is home? It isn't walls, or wealth, or appearances. Home is the place where truth is spoken, where forgiveness is possible, and where we choose each other despite the cost. For anyone listening, whether you are in the autumn of life or still in its spring, remember this: we cannot change the past, but we can shape the future by the choices we make today. To love, to forgive, and to stay. Those are the choices that make a life whole. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. If Hannah's journey touched your heart, we invite you to share it with a friend who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of love, resilience, and second chances. Your support means the world to us, and it keeps these stories alive. Until next time, take care and keep shining.